The morning of my wedding, I stood in front of the mirror in the bridal suite at the Grand Magnolia Hotel in Charleston, South Carolina, adjusting my grandmother's pearl necklace for the 100th time. My phone buzzed on the vanity. A text from Mom. "Don't expect any financial help after today. You're on your own now." I stared at the screen, my stomach dropping. Then, not 5 minutes later, another buzz. This time, it was Marcus Chen, the venture capitalist who'd been considering my startup for 3 months. "Harriet, we need to talk. The board just approved your funding. $2.8 million. Can you call me?" This is the story of how the worst and best moments of my life happened within minutes of each other, and how that day changed everything I thought I knew about family, money, and what it really means to succeed.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months before my wedding day, I was living in a cramped studio apartment above a coffee shop on King Street in Charleston, the kind of place where the espresso machine downstairs served as my alarm clock every morning at 5:30 a.m. The rent was $1,200 a month, which might not sound like much, but when you're bootstrapping a tech startup on savings from your previous job as a marketing coordinator, every dollar counts. My name is Harriet Davison, and at 28, I was that person everyone politely called ambitious, but privately worried was delusional. For 2 years, I'd been developing an app called Green Space, a platform that connected urban dwellers with local farmers and community gardens. Think of it as a cross between a farmer's market and a social network, where people could find fresh, locally grown produce, learn about sustainable living, and build relationships with the people who grew their food. The idea came to me during the pandemic, when I watched my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, trying to sell vegetables from her rooftop garden by posting blurry photos on Facebook. She'd grown enough tomatoes and peppers to feed half our building, but had no easy way to connect with people who wanted to buy them. Meanwhile, everyone was talking about eating healthier and supporting local businesses, but the systems to actually do that were clunky and fragmented. Most mornings, I'd wake up to the sound of milk being steamed below and spend the first hour of my day coding, my laptop balanced on a tiny table I'd bought at a thrift store for $15. The apartment was so small that my bed doubled as my couch, my desk chair, and sometimes my conference room when I had video calls with potential investors or partners. My mother, Patricia Davidson, lived just 45 minutes away in a beautiful colonial house in Mount Pleasant that she'd bought after my father's life insurance payout. Dad had died in a car accident when I was 22, just after I graduated from University of South Carolina with a degree in computer science and a mountain of student debt. Mom had been a stay-at-home parent for most of my childhood, but after Dad's death, she went back to work as a real estate agent and discovered she had a natural talent for it. By the time I started working on Green Space, Mom was pulling in 6 figures annually and had become one of the top agents in the Charleston area. Her Instagram was full of photos of million-dollar waterfront properties and happy clients holding oversized keys. She drove a white BMW, wore designer clothes to church, and had transformed herself from grieving widow to successful businesswoman in less than 5 years. But our relationship had become complicated in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. "Harriet, honey, when are you going to get a real job?" she'd ask during our monthly dinners at her country club. "This app thing is cute, but you need stability, you need benefits, you need a 401k. I tried to explain that Green Space wasn't just a hobby, that I had already connected over 200 local growers with more than 1,500 customers, that our monthly transaction volume was growing by 30% quarter over quarter, that I'd been featured in the Charleston city paper as one of 30 under 30 entrepreneurs to watch. But Mom would just smile that tight smile she'd perfected and change the subject. The truth was, I was barely making ends meet. Most of the revenue Green Space generated went right back into the platform, paying for server costs, marketing, the occasional freelance developer when I needed help with features beyond my skill level. I paid myself a modest salary of $2,000 a month, just enough to cover rent, groceries, and my car payment on a 2018 Honda Civic that I'd bought used with 85,000 miles on it. My personal life was equally complicated. I'd been dating Jake Morrison for 3 years. We'd met at a coffee shop, not the one below my apartment, but a trendy place downtown where he was working as a barista while trying to make it as a musician. Jake was handsome in that effortlessly cool way that made other women do double takes when we walked down the street together. He had sandy brown hair that always looked perfectly tousled, green eyes, and forearms that showed he'd spent his college years rowing crew at College of Charleston. But Jake didn't really understand what I was trying to build with Green Space. He was supportive in the way that people are supportive of their friends' hobbies, encouraging but not really taking it seriously. When I'd work late into the night debugging code or preparing pitch decks for potential investors or partners, he'd suggest I take a break and not stress so much about it. "Babe, you're so smart. You could get a great job at any company in town. Why are you making this so hard on yourself?" he'd say, rubbing my shoulders while I hunched over my laptop. Jake came from a family where financial security was the ultimate goal. His parents, Robert and Susan Morrison, owned a small chain of dry cleaners across the Charleston metro area. They'd built a comfortable middle-class life through careful saving and conservative investments. Jake's plan was to eventually take over the family business, maybe expand it, but certainly not reinvent it.
When Jake proposed to me on New Year's Eve, going down on one knee at the Battery as fireworks exploded over Charleston Harbor, I said yes because I loved him. Because we'd built a life together, because it felt like the next logical step. But even as I admired the simple solitaire diamond he'd chosen, I felt a strange disconnect, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. The wedding planning process had been a series of small compromises that felt larger than they should have. Jake wanted a traditional ceremony at his family's church, followed by a reception at the Grand Magnolia Hotel, the same place his parents had gotten married 30 years earlier. I'd imagined something smaller, maybe outdoors, perhaps at one of the farms that sold through Green Space. But Jake's family was helping pay for the wedding, and they had opinions about what constituted an appropriate celebration. Mom, for her part, seemed more excited about the wedding than I'd seen her about anything in years. She threw herself into the planning with an enthusiasm that surprised me, spending hours on Pinterest creating mood boards and calling venues to ask about availability. She bought a mother of the bride dress that cost more than I usually spent on clothes in 6 months and booked appointments at the most expensive salon in Charleston for hair and makeup. "I want everything to be perfect for you, sweetie," she'd say, her eyes bright with an energy I hadn't seen since before Dad died. "This is such a special time." But beneath her excitement, I sensed something else. A kind of urgency that made me uncomfortable. It felt like she was trying to orchestrate my life into a shape she recognized, a shape that looked like security and conventionality, and all the things she'd learned to value after becoming a widow at 52. 3 weeks before the wedding, I finally landed a meeting with Chen Ventures, a mid-sized venture capital firm based in Atlanta that specialized in sustainable technology and social impact startups. Marcus Chen, the founding partner, had been following Green Space's progress through a mutual connection and wanted to hear my pitch in person. I drove to Atlanta on a Tuesday morning, wearing the one professional dress I owned and carrying a presentation I'd practiced so many times I could give it in my sleep. Marcus's office was in a gleaming downtown high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Centennial Olympic Park. Everything about the space screamed success and serious money. Marcus was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of calm confidence that comes from making smart bets on the right people. He listened intently as I walked through Green Space's metrics, our growth trajectory, our vision for scaling across the Southeast. The local food movement isn't going anywhere, I explained, clicking through slides that showed our user engagement rates and customer retention numbers. We're building the infrastructure to make all of that possible. Marcus asked thoughtful questions about our technology stack, our competitive landscape, our plans for customer acquisition. The meeting ran 90 minutes over schedule, and when it ended, he walked me to the elevator personally. "I'm impressed, Harriet," he said, shaking my hand. "Let me take this back to my partners, and we'll be in touch soon." Soon, in venture capital terms, could mean anything from 2 weeks to 6 months. I drove back to Charleston feeling cautiously optimistic, but trying not to get my hopes up too high.
I'd been through this process before with other investors, and most of the time, "we'll be in touch soon" was a polite way of saying no. But something about Marcus felt different. He'd asked the right questions, understood the market opportunity, and seemed genuinely excited about what we were building. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine what it might feel like to have real funding behind GreenSpace, to hire a proper development team, to scale our marketing efforts, to turn this thing I'd built in my tiny apartment into something that could actually change how people think about food and community. The wedding was now just days away, and I found myself caught between two worlds: the practical, conventional life that Jake and our families expected me to embrace, and the uncertain but thrilling possibility that GreenSpace might actually become something bigger than any of us had imagined. I didn't know it yet, but those two worlds were about to collide in the most unexpected way possible.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The week before my wedding, everything started unraveling in ways I never could have predicted. It began on a Wednesday morning when I received a call from Jennifer Walsh, one of GreenSpace's most successful farmer partners. Jennifer ran Coastal Creek Farm about 30 miles outside Charleston, specializing in heirloom vegetables and organic herbs. She'd been using our platform for 8 months and had built a loyal customer base of over 150 regular buyers. "Harriet, I hate to do this to you right before your big day," Jennifer said, her voice tight with stress. "But I need to talk to you about something serious." I was sitting in my car outside the florist, having just finished confirming the arrangements for Saturday's ceremony. The late April sun was streaming through my windshield, and I could see wedding bouquets through the shop window, white roses and baby's breath, exactly what Jake's mother had insisted would photograph well. "What's going on, Jen?" I asked, switching the call to speaker and grabbing a notebook from my passenger seat. "3 of my biggest competitors just signed exclusive contracts with Fresh Connect," she said, referring to a well-funded startup based in Austin that had recently expanded into the Southeast market. They're offering farmers guaranteed minimums, promises to buy a certain amount of produce every month regardless of consumer demand. It's money up front, Harriet, real security. My stomach dropped. Fresh Connect was exactly the kind of competitor I'd been worried about, a company with serious venture backing that could afford to operate at a loss while they built market share. They were offering farmers something GreenSpace couldn't: financial certainty. "How much are they guaranteeing?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. $15,000 a month minimum for farms our size, $25,000 for the bigger operations. Jennifer paused. "Harriet, you know I believe in what you're building. The community aspect, the way you've helped me connect with my customers personally, that matters to me. But I've got a mortgage, equipment loans, employees. I can't turn down guaranteed money for the hope that your platform will eventually scale to that level." I sat in silence for a moment, watching couples walk past the florist carrying bouquets and centerpieces, preparing for their own weddings, their own new beginnings. Here I was, 5 days before mine, and my business, the thing I'd poured my heart and soul into for 2 years, was facing an existential threat. "Jen, what if I could match their guarantee?" I heard myself saying. "What if GreenSpace could offer you the same kind of financial security?" Even as the words came out of my mouth, I knew I was making a promise I had no idea how to keep. GreenSpace's entire business model was built on taking a small percentage of each transaction. We didn't have the capital to guarantee minimum payments to farmers. "Harriet, honey, I appreciate that, but where would you get that kind of money? You're running this thing out of your apartment. I've seen your office setup when we do video calls." She wasn't wrong, and her gentle honesty stung more than if she'd been cruel about it. Jennifer had become more than a business partner over the months we'd worked together. She was one of the first people who'd really understood what I was trying to build, who'd seen the vision of connecting urban consumers with rural producers in meaningful ways. After we hung up, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at my phone and running the numbers in my head. If Fresh Connect was making similar offers to all the major farms in our network, I could lose 60% of my supplier base within the next month. Without farmers, there was no GreenSpace. That evening, I drove out to Mount Pleasant for dinner with Mom. She'd insisted on cooking for me, saying she wanted to make sure I was eating well before the wedding craziness reached its peak. Her house always felt like stepping into a magazine spread. Everything perfectly coordinated, from the throw pillows on her cream-colored sofa to the fresh flowers she arranged weekly on her dining room table. "You look stressed, sweetheart," she said, as we sat down to grilled salmon and asparagus. She'd opened a bottle of Pinot Grigio and lit candles, creating the kind of atmosphere that was supposed to be relaxing, but somehow made me feel more anxious. "Just wedding stuff," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. The wedding was contributing to my stress, though not in the way she imagined. "Well, that's normal. Every bride feels overwhelmed." Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "But you know what? In a week, all of this planning will be behind you, and you can start focusing on building a real life with Jake. Maybe even start thinking about a family." I pulled my hand back, more sharply than I'd intended. "Mom, I already have a life, and green space is part of that life." Her expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "Harriet, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. After you're married, don't you think it's time to consider more stable options? Jake is going to take over his family's business eventually. You could work with him or find a nice corporate job with benefits and a retirement plan. This startup thing has been a fun experiment, but—" "A fun experiment?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Mom, green space isn't a hobby. It's a real business. We processed over $180,000 in transactions last quarter. We're helping farmers like Jennifer Walsh make a living while connecting urban consumers with fresh, local food. This matters."
Mom set down her fork and looked at me with the same expression she used to give me when I was 12 and insisted I was old enough to walk home from school by myself. Patient but firm, like she was the only one who could see reality clearly. "Sweetheart, I know you think what you're doing is important, and maybe it is in a small way, but you're not making money. You're living in that tiny apartment, driving a car that's 7 years old, wearing the same dress to every nice event because it's the only one you own. That's not success, honey. That's struggle." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel. Mom's tone was gentle, almost loving, but because there was truth in them that I'd been working so hard to ignore. "Your father would want you to be secure," she continued. "He worked his whole life to make sure we'd be okay, and he'd be heartbroken to see you struggling like this when you have other options." Bringing up Dad felt like a low blow, and I suspect Mom knew it. I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping loudly against her hardwood floors. "You don't know what Dad would have wanted," I said, surprising myself with the anger in my voice. "He died before I had the chance to show him what I could build, what I could create. Maybe he would have been proud that I was trying to do something meaningful instead of just playing it safe." Mom's face went very still. "Playing it safe? Harriet, I've worked my ass off to build a successful career after your father died. I've made sure I could support myself, that I'd never be dependent on anyone else's charity. That's not playing it safe. That's being smart." I realized then that we were having two different conversations. Mom was talking about survival, about the lessons she learned after losing the person she'd expected to take care of her financially for the rest of her life. I was talking about dreams, about the possibility of building something that could outlast me, something that could change how people think about food and community and connection. Neither of us was wrong, exactly, but we were speaking completely different languages. I left her house that night feeling more alone than I had in years. Jake was working a late shift at the coffee shop, covering for a coworker who'd called in sick. The bridal suite at the Grand Magnolia Hotel wasn't available until Friday. So I went back to my tiny apartment above the espresso machines and sat on my bed with my laptop, scrolling through GreenSpace's user reviews. "This app changed how I think about where my food comes from," wrote Sarah from downtown Charleston. "I never realized there were so many amazing farms so close to where I live. My kids actually eat vegetables now because they got to meet the farmer who grew them," posted David from North Charleston. "Thank you for creating this connection." As a small-scale farmer, GreenSpace has been a lifeline. Finally, a platform that understands that food is about relationships, not just transactions. Reading these comments reminded me why I'd started GreenSpace in the first place. It wasn't just about building a successful business.
Though I desperately wanted it to be successful, it was about creating something that mattered, something that brought people together instead of pushing them apart. But sitting there in my apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my modest lifestyle, I couldn't shake my mother's words. Was I being naive? Was I so focused on my vision that I couldn't see the practical realities that everyone else understood clearly? My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Long day, coming over in 20, can't wait to see my beautiful fiancé. 5 days until our wedding. 2 years of work on green space potentially about to disappear if I couldn't figure out how to compete with Fresh Connect's guarantees. A mother who loved me but couldn't understand what I was trying to accomplish. A fiancé who supported me but didn't really grasp why any of this mattered so much. For the first time since I'd started green space, I allowed myself to seriously consider what giving up would look like. Maybe Mom was right. Maybe it was time to stop struggling and start living like a practical adult. Maybe the smart thing to do was find a stable job, help Jake with his family's business, start a family of our own, and let someone else figure out how to revolutionize the local food system. But as I sat there in the glow of my laptop screen, surrounded by the quiet hum of my tiny apartment, another part of me whispered that maybe the awakening wasn't about giving up my dreams. Maybe it was finally understanding how much they truly meant to me and what I was willing to sacrifice to see them through. I just had no idea that the universe was about to test that resolve in the most dramatic way possible.
Thursday morning, 2 days before my wedding, I woke up to find 3 more emails in my inbox from farmers wanting to discuss important changes to their selling arrangements. I didn't need to open them to know what they said. Fresh Connect was moving fast, and my carefully built network was crumbling. But instead of immediately diving into crisis management, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in months. I went for a walk. Not a purposeful walk to clear my head or get exercise, but an aimless wander through downtown Charleston, the kind of meandering exploration I used to love before every moment of my day became scheduled around green space tasks or wedding preparations. I ended up at the Charleston City Market, the historic covered marketplace where tourists bought sweetgrass baskets and local artisans sold their wares. It was barely 9 a.m., so the crowds hadn't arrived yet. I walked past the empty vendor stalls, thinking about something my father had told me years ago. I was 16, working my first job at a local ice cream shop, and I'd come home frustrated because my manager had criticized the way I was scooping ice cream. Apparently, I was being too generous with portions, which was cutting into profits. "Dad, I just want to make people happy," I'd complained. "What's wrong with giving customers a little extra?" He'd looked up from his newspaper and smiled. "Nothing's wrong with it, Harriet, but you've got to decide what kind of business person you want to be. Do you want to maximize profits, or do you want to maximize joy? Both are valid choices, but they lead to very different lives." "Can't you do both?" I'd asked. He said, "Sometimes. But when you can't, you need to know which one matters more to you. That knowledge will guide every important decision you make." Standing in the empty market that Thursday morning, I finally understood what he'd been trying to teach me. Fresh Connect was maximizing profits, offering farmers guaranteed money because they had investors willing to subsidize those guarantees while they captured market share. I'd been trying to maximize joy, creating genuine connections between farmers and consumers, building a community around shared values rather than just transactions. The question was, in a world where venture-backed competitors could simply outspend me, was maximizing joy a viable business strategy? My phone rang, jolting me out of my reverie. The caller ID showed Jake Morrison. "Hey, babe, where are you? I stopped by your apartment to bring you coffee, but you're not there." "I'm at the city market, just thinking." "About what? Please tell me you're not spiraling about wedding stuff. My mom says that's totally normal, but we've got everything handled." Jake's assumption that my stress was wedding-related used to irritate me, but that morning it felt like a revelation. He genuinely couldn't imagine that anything else in my life might be significant enough to cause me real anxiety.
Not GreenSpace's impending collapse, not the potential loss of 2 years of work, not the question of what kind of person I wanted to be. Jake, what do you think I should do if GreenSpace fails? There was a pause. What do you mean, fails? I thought things were going well. They were, but there's a new competitor offering farmers guaranteed payments. I could lose most of my suppliers in the next few weeks. Another pause, longer this time. Well, if that happens, at least you tried, right? And honestly, babe, maybe it would be a blessing in disguise. You've been so stressed about this for so long, you could get a regular job, something with normal hours and benefits. We could start planning for the future. Kids, a house, real life stuff. This is real life stuff, Jake. I know. I didn't mean it like that. It's just, Harriet, I love how passionate you are about this, but watching you struggle all the time is hard for me too. I want you to be happy, and sometimes I wonder if this is actually making you happy or just making you anxious. It was a fair question, and one I'd been avoiding asking myself. Was I happy? Or was I just addicted to the stress of building something from nothing? Can we talk about this later? I need to deal with some business stuff. Sure, but remember, we have the rehearsal dinner tonight. My parents are expecting everyone at 6. After we hung up, I walked to a bench overlooking the Cooper River and called Dr. Sarah Martinez, a business professor at College of Charleston who'd been informally mentoring me for the past year. Sarah had started and sold 2 companies before transitioning to academia, and she had a way of asking questions that forced me to think clearly about complicated situations. Harriet, what's your customer acquisition cost versus your customer lifetime value? She asked after I'd explained the Fresh Connect situation. I rattled off the numbers from memory. CAC is about $23 per customer, and our LTV is $340 over an average relationship of 18 months. Good ratio. What about your farmers? How much revenue does the average farmer generate through your platform annually? About $12,000, though the range is wide. Someone like Jennifer Walsh does closer to $35,000. And how much would it cost you to provide the same guarantees Fresh Connect is offering? I did some quick mental math. For our current farmer network, about $400,000 annually. Do you have $400,000? No. Could you raise $400,000?
I paused. Marcus Chen had said his firm typically invested between $1 million and $5 million in Series A rounds. Even if he decided not to invest, there were other VCs, angel investors, crowdfunding options. The money existed somewhere. Maybe. But Sarah, what if I raise that money and Fresh Connect just increases their guarantees? What if this becomes a race to see who can subsidize farmers more? That's not a game I can win long term. Then don't play that game, she said simply. What's your actual competitive advantage? Not what you wish it was, but what it really is. I thought about Jennifer's comment about the community aspect, about the customer reviews talking about connecting with their farmers, about the relationships that had formed through GreenSpace that went beyond simple transactions. We create relationships, I said slowly. Fresh Connect is essentially a supply chain optimization company. They're efficient, but they're not personal. When customers buy through GreenSpace, they know who grew their food. They can message farmers directly, request specific vegetables, even visit the farms. It's not just a marketplace, it's a community. So what would happen if, instead of trying to match Fresh Connect's financial guarantees, you doubled down on that community aspect? What if you made your platform so valuable to both farmers and customers from a relationship standpoint that the money became secondary? The conversation with Sarah shifted something in my thinking. I'd been approaching the Fresh Connect problem as if I needed to compete on their terms, guaranteed payments and financial security. But what if their approach actually created an opportunity for me to differentiate GreenSpace even more clearly? I spent the next 3 hours sitting by the river, sketching out ideas in a notebook I'd bought from a convenience store. Some were impractical, others were brilliant, most were somewhere in between. But for the first time in days, I felt energized instead of defeated. The rehearsal dinner was at a private dining room at Husk, one of Charleston's most celebrated restaurants. Jake's parents had insisted on hosting, and they'd invited both immediate families plus our wedding party, about 20 people total. The room was elegant, but intimate, with exposed brick walls and soft lighting that made everyone look like they were posing for a magazine spread about Southern hospitality. I arrived 15 minutes late, having lost track of time while coding a rough prototype of one of my new community features. Jake met me at the door, looking handsome in a navy blazer and concerned about my tardiness. "Everything okay? You look intense," he said, studying in my face. "Actually, yeah, I think I figured out how to handle the green space situation." His expression flickered between relief and something that might have been disappointment. "That's great, babe, but maybe we could focus on the wedding stuff tonight? Tomorrow's going to be crazy, and I just want to enjoy this moment with our families." Looking around the room at our gathered loved ones, Jake's parents beaming with pride, my mother elegant in a black cocktail dress, our friends laughing and toasting with champagne, I realized Jake was right. This was supposed to be a celebration of our commitment to each other, not another brainstorming session about my business challenges. But as I moved through the evening, making small talk and accepting congratulations, I felt like I was watching it all through glass. Everyone seemed so certain about what came next. The wedding, married life, the conventional path forward. Meanwhile, I was buzzing with ideas about farm-to-table cooking classes and virtual farmer Q&A sessions and seasonal produce subscription boxes that came with recipes and growing tips. "Harriet looks radiant," I overheard Jake's mother telling someone. "I'm so glad she's finally ready to settle down and focus on what really matters." The comment stopped me cold. Focus on what really matters. The assumption that getting married meant I'd stop caring about green space, that becoming a wife would automatically transform my priorities, felt both insulting and terrifying. Later that evening, after we'd returned to our respective apartments for our last night as single people, I sat on my bed with my laptop, refining the ideas I'd sketched by the river. The apartment felt different somehow. Not like home, but like a launching pad. Whether green space succeeded or failed, whether my marriage to Jake lasted or didn't, this chapter of my life was ending. The question was, what story did I want to tell in the next one? At 2 a.m., I wrote an email to Marcus Chen. Not asking about the status of his investment decision, but proposing a call to discuss a pivot in Greenspace's business model. I had new ideas about how to create sustainable competitive advantages, new ways to think about the local food ecosystem, new approaches that no competitor could simply outspend. I hesitated before hitting send. Tomorrow was my wedding day. I should be thinking about marriage vows and seating charts and whether the weather would cooperate for our outdoor photos. Instead, I was thinking about user engagement metrics and customer retention strategies and how to turn a simple marketplace into something that could change the way people think about food. But as I stared at the email draft, I realized this wasn't a choice between my personal life and my professional ambitions. This was about choosing between different versions of myself. The version that played it safe and followed conventional expectations, or the version that was willing to risk everything for the chance to build something extraordinary. I clicked send and closed my laptop. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight, for the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again.
Saturday morning arrived with perfect Charleston weather, sunny skies, gentle breeze, and that golden light that makes everything look like a postcard. I should have been nervous about walking down the aisle in 6 hours. Instead, I was sitting in the bridal suite at the Grand Magnolia Hotel at 7 a.m., still in my pajamas, frantically coding updates to the green space platform on my laptop. The email I'd sent Marcus Chen at 2 a.m. had generated an immediate response. "Intriguing timing, Harriet. Can you send me a brief outline of these new ideas? I'm presenting to my partners Monday morning, and this could change our discussion significantly."
So while my bridesmaids, my college roommate Rachel, Jake's sister Emma, and my cousin Olivia were getting their hair done in the salon downstairs, I was building wireframes for what I was calling Green Space 2.0, the Community Edition. The core idea was simple but revolutionary. Instead of competing with Fresh Connect on guaranteed payments, we'd create value they couldn't replicate. Farmers who joined our enhanced platform wouldn't just sell produce, they'd become educators, community leaders, and local celebrities. Customers wouldn't just buy vegetables, they'd join a movement. My new features included farmer profile videos, seasonal growing calendars, live Q&A sessions during harvest time, recipe exchanges between customers, and most ambitiously, a program called Adopt a Plot, where customers could sponsor specific sections of farms and receive weekly updates on their vegetables' progress from seed to harvest. Harriet Elizabeth Davidson, what are you doing? I looked up to see my mother standing in the doorway of the bridal suite, immaculate in her champagne-colored mother-of-the-bride dress, her perfectly styled hair already camera-ready. Her expression was somewhere between exasperation and genuine concern. I'm just handling some business stuff, Mom. I'll be ready on time. She closed the door behind her and sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to wrinkle her dress. Sweetheart, it's your wedding day. Whatever crisis you think you're dealing with can wait until after your honeymoon. It's not a crisis. It's an opportunity. Marcus Chen wants to see my new business plan before he meets with his partners on Monday. Marcus who? The venture capitalist I told you about. Mom, this could be it, the funding that makes green space sustainable long-term. She was quiet for a moment, studying my face with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then she sighed and reached over to close my laptop. Harriet Elizabeth Davidson, I need to tell you something, and I should have said it a long time ago. I'm not trying to discourage you because I don't believe in you. I'm trying to protect you because I know what it feels like to build your entire life around something that can disappear in an instant. This was not the conversation I'd expected to have while wearing Hello Kitty pajamas in a hotel bridal suite. What do you mean? Your father and I thought we had everything figured out. He had a stable job with good benefits, we had savings, we owned our house outright. I thought I could afford to be a stay-at-home mom because we'd planned for everything. She twisted her wedding ring, a habit she'd never broken even though Dad had been gone for 6 years. But we hadn't planned for him dying at 48. We hadn't planned for me being 52 with no recent work experience and a daughter in college. I'd never heard her talk about the period after Dad's death with this kind of honesty. In my memory, she'd transitioned from grieving widow to successful realtor almost seamlessly, but I was beginning to realize how much struggle I'd missed or ignored. I learned that security isn't about having one perfect plan. It's about having options, skills that translate across industries, money in the bank that nobody can take away from you. I want you to have those things because I love you, not because I don't believe in your dreams. Before I could respond, there was a knock on the door. Harriet, it's Rachel. We need to start getting you ready. Mom stood up and smoothed her dress. Think about what I said, but think about it after you marry that sweet boy who loves you. The next 3 hours passed in a blur: hair curlers, makeup brushes, and champagne toasts. Rachel, Emma, and Olivia kept a steady stream of chatter about how beautiful I looked, how perfect the weather was, how romantic the whole day felt. I smiled and laughed at the right moments, but part of my brain was still working through the technical challenges of implementing live video feeds from farm sites. At 12 a.m., I was alone in the bridal suite for the first time all morning. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m., and everyone else had gone to check on last-minute details or grab lunch. I sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to wrinkle my dress, and stared at my phone. I had 17 unread emails. 3 were from farmers asking about my response to Fresh Connect's offers. 2 were from customers concerned about changes to the platform. 1 was from a journalist at Charleston Business Journal wanting to interview me about the challenges facing local tech startups. The rest were wedding-related. Confirmations from vendors, well wishes from friends who couldn't attend,
and a sweet note from my high school English teacher who'd seen the announcement in the newspaper.
The contrast was jarring. On one hand, I had this beautiful, conventional life celebration happening around me. Flowers arranged, music rehearsed, guests arriving. On the other hand, I had a business that might not exist in 3 months if I couldn't figure out how to compete with better-funded rivals. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Can't wait to see my beautiful wife in 2 hours. Love you, Mrs. Morrison. Practice for later." Mrs. Morrison. In 2 hours, that would be my legal name. Harriet Morrison, wife of Jake Morrison, future co-owner of Morrison Family Dry Cleaning. It was a perfectly respectable identity, the kind that would make my mother proud and my in-laws happy. But sitting there in that hotel room, still thinking about customer engagement strategies and community-building features, I realized that becoming Mrs. Morrison felt less like an evolution and more like erasure. Another text, this one from an unknown number. "Harriet, this is Jennifer Walsh. I wanted you to know before you heard it elsewhere, I'm signing with Fresh Connect on Monday. I'm sorry. I really am. I hope you understand. Congratulations on your wedding." I stared at the message for a long time. Harriet had been more than just my biggest farming partner. She'd been proof that green space could work, that farmers valued what we were building beyond just the financial benefits. Losing her felt like losing the heart of what made the platform special. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the hotel's manicured gardens where my guests were beginning to arrive. I could see Jake's groomsmen in their navy suits, my college friends in their carefully chosen dresses, both sets of parents greeting relatives I hadn't seen in years. This was the life everyone expected me to choose. Marriage, stability, conventional success. It was a good life, the kind of life that millions of people would be grateful to have. But as I watched the scene below, I felt like I was looking at someone else's dream. At 1:30 p.m., there was a soft knock on my door. "Harriet, it's time." I opened the door to find my mother waiting in the hallway, looking elegant and composed. She studied my face for a moment, then reached out to adjust a strand of hair that had escaped from my updo. "You look beautiful, sweetheart, but you look terrified." "I'm not terrified of marrying Jake. I'm terrified of losing myself." She nodded slowly, as if she'd been expecting this conversation. "What if I told you that you don't have to choose? What if there's a way to build the life you want and keep the dreams that matter to you?" Before I could ask what she meant, she reached into her small purse and pulled out an envelope. "This is from your father. He wrote it for your wedding day, years ago when you were still in high school. I've been carrying it around for weeks, trying to decide whether to give it to you." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Dad's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Harriet, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to walk you down the aisle, and I'm sorry for that. But I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become. I don't know who you're marrying. I hope he's worthy of you. I don't know what you're doing for work. I hope it challenges you. I don't know what dreams you're chasing. I hope they're big enough to scare you. But I know you, and I know that whatever choices you've made them with courage and conviction. Don't let anyone, not your husband, not your mother, not society, convince you that marriage means becoming smaller. The right partner will want you to become more yourself, not less. Love always, Dad. P.S. Trust your instincts. They've never led you wrong." I looked up at my mother through tears that were threatening to ruin my makeup. "Why didn't you show me this before?" She became afraid it would make you more reckless, more willing to take chances that could hurt you. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "But watching you these past few months, seeing how miserable you've been trying to fit into everyone else's expectations, I realized that the biggest risk might be playing it safe." There was another knock on the door. This time it was Emma, looking slightly panicked. "Harriet, everyone's seated. We need to start the processional." I looked at my mother, then at Dad's letter, then at my phone with its growing collection of business crises and opportunities. In 15 minutes, I was supposed to walk down the aisle and promise to love, honor, and cherish Jake Morrison for the rest of my life.
The question was, which version of myself would be making that promise?
I walked down the aisle at exactly 2:17 p.m., 17 minutes behind schedule, carrying my father's letter folded inside my bouquet of white roses. The delay had been caused by what the wedding coordinator diplomatically called a brief moment of bridal nerves, but what had actually been me sitting on the bathroom floor of the bridal suite, hyperventilating while my mother held my hair back and reminded me to breathe. Jake looked impossibly handsome waiting at the altar in his charcoal gray tuxedo, his green eyes bright with tears as I approached. The expression on his face was pure joy, uncomplicated, and certain in a way that made my chest tighten with guilt. He believed he was marrying someone who would walk into their shared future without looking back. The ceremony itself passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. I said the words I was supposed to say, smiled when I was supposed to smile, kissed my new husband when Pastor Williams pronounced us married. But even as I performed each expected moment, part of my mind was calculating conversion rates for the new community features I'd outlined that morning. The reception was held in the hotel's grand ballroom, decorated with magnolia branches and ivory candles that cast everything in a warm, romantic glow. Our first dance was to At Last by Utta James, Jake's choice, not mine. As we swayed together while our families watched and photographed every moment, he whispered in my ear, "We did it, Mrs. Morrison. We're really married." Mrs. Morrison. The name still felt like a costume I was wearing. But the real test of my new dual identity came during the reception dinner, when my phone, discreetly tucked inside my small beaded purse, buzzed with an incoming call. I ignored it the first time, and the second, but when it rang for the third time in 10 minutes, I excused myself to the ladies' room to check. Marcus Chen. On my wedding day, at 8 p.m. on a Saturday. "Harriet, I'm sorry to call so late on your wedding day," he said when I answered, his voice tight with urgency, "but I just got off a conference call with my partners, and we need to move fast. Can you talk?" I was standing in the marble-appointed ladies' room of the Grand Magnolia Hotel, wearing a $3,000 wedding dress with 150 guests expecting me to return to my reception dinner. "I can talk for a few minutes." We love the pivot concept. Community-driven agriculture, relationship-based commerce, the whole approach. It's exactly the kind of differentiated play we want to back in this space. He paused. But here's the thing. We just learned that Fresh Connect is planning to announce a $50 million Series B round on Tuesday. They're going to use that money to expand to 12 new markets and increase their farmer guarantees by 40%. My stomach dropped. If Fresh Connect was raising that kind of money, they weren't just a competitor anymore. They were about to become a market dominator. What does that mean for us? It means if we're going to do this, we need to move now. Not next month, not after your honeymoon. Now. I can get you a term sheet by Wednesday, but only if you can show me a working prototype of these community features by Tuesday morning. A working prototype. In 3 days? Well, I was supposed to be celebrating my marriage and then leaving for a week-long honeymoon in Savannah. "Marcus, I know the timing is impossible," he interrupted, "and I know what I'm asking. But Harriet, this is your window. If Fresh Connect gets that funding and uses it to lock up the market, there won't be another opportunity like this for years." Through the bathroom door, I could hear the band starting to play September by Earth, Wind, and Fire. Our guests were probably wondering where the bride had disappeared to. If I can deliver the prototype by Tuesday morning, what are we talking about in terms of funding? $3.5 million, Series A, enough to build a real tech team, enough to offer competitive farmer incentives, enough to scale the community features across the Southeast. He paused. Enough to win. I closed my eyes and saw my father's handwriting. "Trust your instincts. They've never led you wrong." "I'll have the prototype ready by Tuesday morning." I heard myself saying, "Harriet, are you sure? Because once I take this to the full partnership committee, there's no going back. If you commit to this timeline and then can't deliver, I can deliver." After we hung up, I stood in that elegant bathroom for 5 full minutes, staring at myself in the ornate mirror. My wedding makeup was still perfect, my hair still artfully arranged, my dress still pristine, but everything had changed. I returned to the reception with what I hoped was a convincing smile. Jake was at our head table, chatting with his college roommate about their plans to expand the dry cleaning business into North Charleston. "Everything okay?" he asked as I sat down beside him. "You were gone for a while." "Just some work stuff. Nothing that can't wait." It was a lie, and from the way Jake's expression shifted slightly, I think he knew it, but he chose not to push, perhaps understanding that our wedding reception wasn't the place for a discussion about my business priorities. The rest of the evening unfolded exactly as planned. We cut the cake, I threw my bouquet, caught by my cousin Olivia, who shrieked with delight, and Jake and I made the rounds thanking our guests for coming. To any outside observer, we were the picture of newlywed bliss.
But internally, I was already planning the next 72 hours. The honeymoon would have to be postponed. I could claim food poisoning or a family emergency. I'd need to call Tommy Nguyen, a freelance developer I'd worked with before, and see if he could help with the back-end infrastructure for the new features. I'd need to reach out to at least 5 farmers who hadn't yet signed with Fresh Connect and convince them to participate in beta testing. Most challengingly, I'd need to figure out how to tell Jake that our honeymoon was canceled without destroying our marriage before it had even properly begun. The conversation happened at 1 a.m. in our hotel suite, after we changed out of our wedding clothes and were sitting on the edge of the king-sized bed. Jake had opened a bottle of champagne that his parents had sent up, and we were supposed to be toasting our new life together. "Jake, I need to tell you something," I began, accepting the glass he offered me, but not drinking from it. "That sounds ominous for our wedding night," he said with a smile that didn't quite hide his concern. "Marcus Chen called during the reception. He wants to fund green space, but I need to deliver a prototype by Tuesday morning." Jake's smile faded. "Tuesday? Harriet, we're supposed to be in Savannah on Tuesday. We're supposed to be on our honeymoon." "I know. And I'm sorry, but this is the opportunity I've been working toward for 2 years. If I don't take it now, it might not come again." He set down his champagne glass and turned to face me fully. "So, what are you saying? That you want to cancel our honeymoon?" "Just postpone it a few weeks, maybe a month. Once I get the funding and can hire a proper team, things will be more manageable." Jake was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Harriet, we just got married, today, a few hours ago, and you're already choosing work over our relationship. That's not what this is." "Then what is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're willing to cancel the first trip we were supposed to take as husband and wife because some investor called." I could hear the hurt beneath his anger, and it made my chest ache. He wasn't wrong. I was choosing work over our honeymoon, but he also wasn't seeing the bigger picture. "Jake, this isn't just about some investor. This is about building something that could change how people think about food and farming and community. This is about creating something that matters. And our marriage doesn't matter?" "Of course it matters, but this is time sensitive. Our marriage isn't going anywhere." The words came out wrong, dismissive in a way I hadn't intended. Jake's face went very still. "Our marriage isn't going anywhere," he repeated slowly. "Is that really how you think about this? Like it's just something stable in the background while you chase your real priorities?" I realized I'd stumbled into territory that was about much more than our honeymoon plans. This was about fundamental differences in how we viewed commitment, partnership, and what it meant to build a life together. "That's not what I meant," I said, but even as I spoke, I wondered if maybe it was exactly what I meant. The argument that followed lasted until almost 3 a.m. Jake accused me of treating our marriage like a backup plan. I accused him of not understanding what green space meant to me. He pointed out that I had hidden the phone call from him for hours. I pointed out that he'd never shown real interest in my work anyway. By the time we finally went to sleep, both of us exhausted and hurt, it was clear that our honeymoon wasn't the only thing that would need to be postponed. Any real conversation about how to blend our very different visions of married life would have to wait until I either succeeded or failed spectacularly at delivering what I'd promised Marcus Chen. Sunday morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. and immediately started coding. Jake left early to go for a run, and when he returned 2 hours later, I was still in my pajamas at the hotel room desk, surrounded by empty coffee cups and pages of scribbled notes. "The hotel checkout is at 11, he said quietly. "I know, I'll be ready."
But we both understood that ready meant different things to each of us. Jake was ready to begin our marriage. I was ready to bet everything on 72 hours that would either validate 2 years of work or destroy both my business and my relationship with my new husband. As I packed my laptop and headed home to my tiny apartment above the coffee shop, Mrs. Morrison returning to the life of Harriet Davidson, entrepreneur, I realized that the testing phase wasn't just about proving green space could work. It was about discovering whether I could be both a wife and a CEO, whether Jake could love the version of me that put everything on the line for a dream, and whether a marriage that started with such fundamentally different expectations could survive the collision between love and ambition. The next 3 days would determine everything.
Monday morning at 4:30 a.m., I was sitting in my apartment with 3 empty energy drink cans, 2 laptops running simultaneously, and the growing realization that I had fundamentally underestimated what I'd promised Marcus Chen. Building a working prototype of the community features in less than 48 hours wasn't just challenging, it was borderline impossible for a one-person operation. The apartment felt smaller than ever, cramped with the detritus of my all-night coding session. I'd moved the coffee table against the wall to make room for a whiteboard I'd bought at 2 a.m. from a 24-hour office supply store. The board was covered with user flow diagrams, database schemas, and increasingly desperate notes to myself like simplify and what would Dad do? Tommy Nguyen had agreed to help with the back-end work, but he couldn't start until Monday evening due to his day job at a Charleston tech company. That left me with roughly 36 hours to build the user interface, create the content management system for farmer profiles, and somehow integrate live video streaming capabilities, all while making it look professional enough to convince serious investors. At 6 a.m., my phone rang. Jake. Hey. His voice was careful, neutral. I wanted to check on you before I head to work. Did you sleep at all? I looked around at my chaotic workspace, then down at my clothes, the same yoga pants and college t-shirt I'd put on after we returned from the hotel yesterday. Not really, but I'm making progress. Harriet, he paused, and I could hear traffic in the background. He was probably walking to the coffee shop for his opening shift. I've been thinking about our fight last night. I don't want to be the husband who doesn't support his wife's dreams. The word husband still sounded surreal. We'd been married for exactly 41 hours. But I also don't want to be married to someone who sees me as an obligation to manage around her real priorities. So I guess what I'm asking is, when this is over, however it turns out, can we figure out how to do this together? Actually, together? It was a fair question and a generous offer considering how our wedding night had ended. Yeah, I said, meaning it. I want that too. Okay, good. His voice warmed slightly. Do you need anything? Food? Coffee? Moral support? Actually, I said, surprising myself, could you bring me one of those breakfast sandwiches from your shop when you get off work? And maybe, I hesitated, maybe just sit with me for a while? I think I've been alone with this for so long that I forgot how to let people help. I'd like that, he said. I'll see you around too. After we hung up, I felt something shift in my chest. Not quite relief, but a loosening of tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Maybe there was a way to be both married and entrepreneurial. Maybe the problem wasn't choosing between Jake and green space, but learning how to integrate the parts of my life instead of keeping them in separate competing boxes. The breakthrough came at 11:47 a.m., and it wasn't technological. It was philosophical. I'd been struggling with the video streaming feature, trying to build something that would allow farmers to broadcast live from their fields. Every approach I tried was either too complex to implement quickly or too simple to be compelling. I was on my 7th cup of coffee and my 2nd minor panic attack when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi, Harriet.
This is David Chen. Marcus is my dad. He told me about your app, and I think it's really cool. I'm 14, and I've been helping my uncle with his garden this summer. Would farmers on your app want to teach kids about growing food? I have lots of questions, and YouTube videos are boring. I stared at the message for a long time. David Chen, Marcus's teenage son, had just identified something I'd been missing in all my complex feature planning. The magic of green space wasn't going to be in sophisticated technology. It was going to be in genuine human connections. Instead of building elaborate live streaming infrastructure, what if I created something simpler but more personal? A system where customers could submit questions to their favorite farmers, and farmers could respond with short personal videos shot on their phones. Not live broadcasts that required expensive equipment and perfect timing, but asynchronous conversations that fit into real people's actual schedules. I scrapped everything I'd built over the past 18 hours and started over with a completely different approach. Instead of trying to recreate Facebook Live for farmers, I built something that felt more like a video pen pal system. Customers could ask questions like, "What's the best way to store these tomatoes?" Or, "Can you show me how you decide when corn is ready to harvest?" Farmers could respond with personal videos, and other customers could see both the questions and answers, creating a growing library of practical knowledge. By 2 p.m., when Jake arrived with lunch, I had a working prototype that actually felt magical, not because it was technically sophisticated, but because it was genuinely useful and personal in a way that no competitor could easily replicate. "This is incredible," Jake said, watching over my shoulder as I demonstrated the question and answer system. He'd brought not just a breakfast sandwich, but also a thermos of good coffee and a small bouquet of sunflowers. "That's exactly what it is," I said, clicking through farmer profiles that now included not just photos and produce lists, but short introduction videos where they talked about their farming philosophy and what questions they most enjoyed answering.
Jake sat cross-legged on my floor, eating his own sandwich while I continued coding. For the first time since we'd returned from our wedding, the atmosphere between us felt easy, collaborative rather than competitive. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a while. "What happens if Marcus says yes? What does your life look like if you get the funding?" It was a question I'd been avoiding thinking about clearly. I'd hire a real development team, maybe rent actual office space, scale the platform to work with farmers across the Southeast. I paused. It would mean a lot of travel, a lot of long days, probably a lot of stress for the first year or two. And what happens if he says no? That question was harder. I don't know. Maybe I try to find other investors. Maybe I figure out how to keep bootstrapping. Maybe I stopped coding and looked at him directly. Maybe I finally listened to everyone who's been telling me to be more practical. Is that what you want me to say? That you should be more practical? I thought about it seriously. No. I want you to say that you believe in what I'm building, even when it's scary and uncertain and disruptive to the life we planned. Then that's what I'm saying. He smiled. I believe in what you're building, and I believe in you, even when you're terrifying. At 6 p.m., Tommy arrived with takeout Thai food and immediately dove into the back-end infrastructure while I focused on polishing the user interface. We worked in comfortable concentration, occasionally troubleshooting problems together or testing new features. By 10 p.m., we had something that worked smoothly and looked professional. But more importantly, we had something that felt different from anything else in the market. When I clicked through the demo, I could imagine my own grandmother using it to ask her favorite farmer about the best varieties of tomatoes for canning, or David Chen using it to learn about companion planting techniques. "You know what's crazy?" Tommy said as we ran final tests on the video upload system. "This actually makes me want to buy vegetables from local farmers, and I've been living on frozen dinners and takeout for like 3 years. That comment hit me harder than any technical achievement. we'd built something that created genuine desire for connection, not just a more efficient way to complete transactions. At midnight, I finally allowed myself to think about Tuesday's presentation. Instead of dreading it, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, genuine excitement about showing someone what green space could become. I also felt something else, gratitude for the chaos of the past 3 days. The impossible deadline had forced me to stop overthinking and start trusting my instincts about what really mattered. The pressure had burned away all the features I thought I needed and revealed the core of what made green space special. Most surprisingly, the crisis had brought Jake and me closer together instead of driving us apart. Watching him bring me food, ask thoughtful questions about the business, and offer support without trying to take over had shown me a version of partnership I hadn't imagined was possible. At 1 a.m., I finally saved all my work, backed everything up to 3 different cloud services, and crawled into bed next to my husband of 3 days. Jake had fallen asleep on top of the covers, still wearing his jeans, waiting for me to finish. "Hey," I whispered, gently shaking his shoulder. "You can get under the blankets. I'm done for tonight." He opened his eyes and smiled sleepily. "How do you feel?" I felt terrified and excited and proud and exhausted, but mostly ready. Good, because watching you work these past few days, I think I'm finally starting to understand what this means to you, and I want to be part of it, whatever happens next. In 8 hours, I would present GreenSpace 2.0 to Marcus Chen and his partners. In 8 hours, I would learn whether 2 years of work would culminate in success or failure. But lying there in the dark next to Jake, I realized that regardless of what happened with the funding, something important had already shifted. I'd stopped trying to choose between being an entrepreneur and being a wife, and started figuring out how to be both, fully and without apology. The breakthrough wasn't just technological, it was personal. And for the first time since I'd started GreenSpace, I felt like I was building something sustainable, not just a business, but a life.
Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., I was sitting in the sleek conference room at Chen Ventures in Atlanta, wearing my one good business suit and trying not to fidget with my wedding ring. Marcus Chen sat across from me with his 3 partners, Alina Rodriguez, a former tech executive who specialized in scaling consumer platforms, James Kim, a data scientist who'd built analytics tools for major retailers, and Sarah Patel, who'd founded and sold 2 successful ag tech companies. "Before we start," Marcus said, "I want you to know that we've never made an investment decision this quickly. Usually our due diligence process takes 3 to 6 months. But given the competitive landscape and what Fresh Connect announced yesterday, we're prepared to move at an unusual pace." Yesterday? I'd been so focused on building the prototype that I'd missed Fresh Connect's announcement. What did they announce? Elena pulled up a news article on her tablet. $52 million Series B, just as Marcus predicted. They're expanding to 15 new markets over the next 6 months and guaranteeing farmers up to $40,000 monthly in minimum purchases. The numbers hit me like a physical blow. $40,000 per month was more than most of our farmers made in a year through GreenSpace. How could we possibly compete with that kind of financial security? "I know what you're thinking," Sarah said, seeming to read my expression. "You're wondering how a community platform can compete with guaranteed money. But here's what Fresh Connect's investors might not have considered. Guaranteed payments only work if you have guaranteed demand. They're betting they can acquire customers faster than they're acquiring farmers. If that equation gets out of balance, the whole model collapses." James leaned forward. "Show us what you've built, Harriet. Show us why relationships might be more valuable than guarantees." For the next 45 minutes, I walked them through GreenSpace 2.0. I demonstrated the video Q&A system, showed them farmer profiles that felt like getting to know a neighbor, explained how customers could track their adopted plots from planting through harvest.
Most importantly, I showed them the early user engagement data from the beta test I'd launched at 6 a.m. that morning. In 6 hours, we've had 127 questions submitted to farmers, I said, clicking through the interface. Farmers have responded to 89 of them. Average video response time is 3.2 minutes, but customers are watching them for an average of 7.4 minutes, often multiple times. That's remarkable engagement, Elena said, studying the numbers. People don't typically watch agricultural content for 7 minutes unless they're genuinely invested. The magic is in the personal connection, I explained. When former partner Jennifer Walsh, shows a customer exactly how she selects the ripest peaches, that customer doesn't just buy peaches from Jennifer. They tell their friends about Jennifer. They post photos on social media. They become advocates for local farming in general. Marcus was taking notes on his laptop. What's your customer acquisition cost with this model versus the original marketplace? 63% lower. When customers feel connected to their farmers, they become organic marketers. We're seeing referral rates of 34% compared to 8% with the original platform. Sarah nodded approvingly. Community-driven growth, much more sustainable than paid acquisition, especially in competitive markets. For the next hour, they grilled me on technical scalability, financial projections, competitive strategy, and operational challenges. But unlike previous investor meetings where I'd felt like I was defending weaknesses, this felt like collaborative problem solving. They understood what I was building and were helping me think through how to build it better. Here's our concern, James said, finally. We've built something that clearly creates value for both farmers and customers, but you're still one person with limited resources. Fresh Connect has 47 employees and just raised enough money to operate at a loss for 2 years while they capture market share. How do you scale fast enough to compete? It was the question I'd been dreading, but also the one I'd been preparing for. I don't think I need to match their scale to succeed. I think I need to match their impact. Fresh Connect is trying to become the Uber of local food, efficient, standardized, convenient. I'm trying to become the neighborhood of local food, personal, unique, meaningful. Can you elaborate on that? Alina asked. Neighborhoods don't scale the same way corporations do, but they're also more resilient, more sustainable, and harder to disrupt. If I can help farmers build genuine relationships with their customers, if I can create communities around shared values instead of just shared transactions, then even if Fresh Connect gets bigger, they can't offer what we offer. Marcus closed his laptop and looked directly at me. Harriet, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Not what you think we want to hear, but what you actually believe. Do you think Green Space can become a $100 million company? I thought about Jennifer Walsh's farm, about David Chen's questions about gardening, about the customers who'd sent thank you notes for helping them connect with the local food. I thought about my father's advice about choosing between maximizing profits and maximizing joy. I don't know if Green Space will ever be worth $100 million, I said slowly, but I think it can create $100 million worth of value. Maybe that value shows up as better relationships between farmers and customers. Maybe it shows up as kids learning where food comes from. Maybe it shows up as small farms staying viable when they might otherwise disappear. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Sarah smiled. That's exactly the right answer. We'd like to make you an offer. $3.7 million for a Series A round. We'll take a 25% equity stake, and you'll maintain control of the company and the vision. I stared at them, processing what he'd just said. $3.7 million. Enough to hire a real team, enough to compete with Fresh Connect's farmer incentives, enough to turn Green Space from a promising idea into a sustainable business.
However, Elena added, we have one non-negotiable condition. You need to hire a chief operating officer within 60 days, someone with experience scaling consumer platforms. Someone who can handle the operational complexity while you focus on product development and community building. It was a smart condition, and one I would have resisted 6 months ago. The old version of me would have insisted that I could do everything myself, that bringing in an experienced COO would dilute my vision or compromise my control. But the past week had taught me the value of accepting help from people who complemented my skills rather than duplicated them.
I accept, I said. The next 2 hours were spent discussing term sheets, timeline details, and next steps. By the time I walked out of Chen Ventures' office at 1:30 p.m., I had a formal offer letter, a wire transfer confirmation, and the surreal realization that GreenSpace was no longer a struggling startup, but a properly funded company. I called Jake from the parking garage, my hands shaking as I dialed. "How'd it go?" he answered immediately. "They said yes. $3.7 million, Jake. We did it." "Holy shit. Harriet, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you." "I want to celebrate with you," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. "Can you get off work early? I'm driving back now, and I want to take my husband out to dinner to celebrate our first major business milestone as a married couple." "I like the sound of that," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Mrs. CEO Morrison." The drive back to Charleston gave me time to process what had just happened. For 2 years, I'd been fighting to prove that GreenSpace could work. Now I had to figure out how to make it actually work, at scale, with real money and real expectations and real competition. But I also had something I'd never had before, a true partner in both my personal and professional life. Jake's support over the past 3 days had shown me that marriage didn't have to mean choosing between love and ambition. It could mean having someone who believed in your dreams even when they didn't fully understand them. That evening, we had dinner at Fig, one of Charleston's best restaurants, the kind of place we'd never been able to afford on my startup salary. We ordered wine that cost more than my usual monthly grocery budget and toasted to new beginnings and impossible deadlines. "So what happens next?" Jake asked, as we shared a dessert that was more art than food. "I hire a team, I find office space, I figure out how to scale a community-driven platform without losing what makes it special." I paused. "And I take my very patient husband on the honeymoon I promised him." "About that," Jake said, reaching across the table to take my hand, "I've been thinking, what if instead of going to Savannah, we took a trip to visit some of the farms that use GreenSpace? I know it sounds weird for a honeymoon, but I'd love to understand your world better. And I bet farmers would love to meet the husband of the woman who's been helping them build their businesses." It was such a perfect suggestion that I almost cried. "You want to spend our honeymoon visiting vegetable farms? I want to spend our honeymoon getting to know the person I married, and this is clearly a huge part of who you are." 3 months later, GreenSpace had a team of 12 people working out of a renovated warehouse space in downtown Charleston. We'd signed exclusive partnerships with 47 farms across South Carolina and Georgia. Our monthly transaction volume had grown by 340%, and our customer satisfaction scores were consistently above 90%. More importantly, we've proven that community-driven commerce could compete with pure efficiency models. While Fresh Connect continued to grow through aggressive marketing and farmer subsidies, GreenSpace grew through word-of-mouth referrals and genuine customer loyalty. The honeymoon farm tour had become a monthly tradition. Jake and I would spend weekends visiting GreenSpace partners, helping with harvest festivals, and documenting the stories behind the food that appeared on our platform. Jake's photography skills, developed as a hobby during college, turned out to be perfect for capturing the human side of farming in ways that made our marketing materials feel authentic rather than polished. But the most significant integration wasn't professional, it was personal. I'd learned to include Jake in my business decisions, not as someone who needed to approve my choices, but as someone's perspective that made my thinking sharper. He'd learned to see GreenSpace not as competition for my attention, but as an extension of the values that had attracted him to me in the first place. We were building something together now, not just a marriage, but a shared mission to strengthen the connections between people and the food that sustained them. It was bigger than either of us had imagined possible when we set our vows 6 months earlier, and more fulfilling than anything I'd accomplished on my own. The girl who'd started GreenSpace in a tiny apartment above a coffee shop was gone. In her place was a woman who'd learned that the most important growth wasn't just in business metrics, but in the capacity to let other people help you become more than you could be alone.
1 year after my wedding day, I was standing in the middle of a packed auditorium at the University of South Carolina, delivering the keynote speech for their annual Entrepreneurship Summit. The irony wasn't lost on me. Exactly 12 months earlier, I'd been coding frantically in a hotel bridal suite, wondering if my business would survive the week.
Now I was being asked to share insights about building sustainable, community-driven companies with an audience of aspiring entrepreneurs. The most dangerous advice anyone ever gave me, I said, looking out at the sea of eager faces, was to choose between my personal life and my professional ambitions. The assumption was that success required sacrifice, that you couldn't build something meaningful without giving up everything else that mattered to you. In the front row, Jake sat with my mother, both of them beaming with pride. Mom had become one of GreenSpace's most enthusiastic advocates, using her real estate connections to help us identify potential office locations, and even featuring local farms in her luxury home staging. The transformation in our relationship had been as dramatic as any business metric. But here's what I learned. The most sustainable businesses aren't built by people who sacrifice everything for their vision. They're built by people who integrate their vision with their values, who find ways to honor both their dreams and their relationships. The past year had taught me that success wasn't just about reaching a destination. It was about becoming the kind of person who could handle whatever came next. And what came next for GreenSpace had exceeded even my most optimistic projections. We now had partnerships with 127 farms across 4 states. Our team had grown to 23 employees, including Dr. Linda Patterson, the former VP of Operations at a major agricultural cooperative, who joined us as COO. Linda's experience with large-scale food distribution had been invaluable as we navigated the complexities of rapid growth without losing our community focus. More significantly, we'd launched GreenSpace Academy, an educational platform that offered online courses in sustainable farming, urban gardening, and food preservation. The Academy had started as a natural extension of our video Q&A feature. When farmers kept getting the same questions about composting techniques or pest management, we began organizing their responses into structured learning modules. Within 6 months, GreenSpace Academy had 3,400 enrolled students, from suburban families wanting to start backyard gardens to young farmers looking to transition to organic practices. We were no longer just connecting existing farmers with customers, we were actively creating the next generation of sustainable food producers. The Academy had also solved a problem I hadn't fully anticipated: seasonal revenue fluctuations. During winter months, when local produce was limited, the educational platform provided steady income for farmers who earned money teaching what they knew. Thomas Campbell, a third-generation farmer from upstate South Carolina, had told me that his winter teaching income through GreenSpace Academy now exceeded what he'd previously made during peak harvest season. But the development I was most proud of wasn't technological or financial. It was cultural. GreenSpace had evolved into something that felt less like a business and more like a movement. Our annual Harvest Festival in Charleston's Marion Square had attracted over 8,000 people the previous October, featuring cooking demonstrations, live music, and a farmers market that showcased every producer in our network. More importantly, we were seeing measurable impact on local food systems. A study conducted by the Clemson University School of Agriculture had found that counties with active GreenSpace partnerships had 23% higher rates of new farm business formation compared to similar counties without our platform. Young people were choosing farming as a career in part because they could see a clear path to building sustainable customer relationships. The night before my wedding, I told the university audience, I received a text from my mother that said, "Don't expect any financial help after today. You're on your own now." At the time, it felt like abandonment. But I realize now that she was giving me the greatest gift possible, the knowledge that whatever I built would be truly mine. I caught Mom's eye in the audience and saw her wipe away a tear. We'd talked extensively about that text message in the months since the wedding. She'd sent it not out of cruelty, but out of fear that I would always expect someone else to solve my problems if things got difficult. Her own experience of unexpected financial independence after Dad's death had taught her that the most valuable security came from knowing you could take care of yourself. 5 minutes after that text, I received a call that changed everything. But the call wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that I was ready to answer it. I was ready because I'd spent 2 years building something I believed in, even when nobody else understood it.
I was ready because I'd learned to trust my own judgment about what had value. The past year had also brought unexpected developments in my relationship with Jake. His photography work for Greenspace had evolved into a legitimate side business, with other agricultural organizations hiring him to document their operations. More surprisingly, he'd discovered a talent for video production, creating short documentaries about individual farmers that had become some of our most popular marketing content. His film about Maria Santos, a young woman who started an herb farm on her family's unused land in rural Georgia, had been viewed over 100,000 times and inspired 12 other young people to start similar operations. Jake was no longer just supportive of my work. He had become a creative collaborator whose skills complemented my own in ways we'd never anticipated. We'd also made a decision that would have seemed impossible during our stressful wedding week. We were planning to start a family. Not because we'd achieved some mythical work-life balance, but because we'd learned to build a life where work and family could grow together rather than compete for space. The entrepreneur's journey isn't about choosing between stability and risk. It's about creating new kinds of stability. Stability that comes from building something valuable, from developing skills that translate across industries, from cultivating relationships that sustain you through uncertainty. During the Q&A session after my speech, a young woman in the third row raised her hand and said, "Ms. Morrison, how do you handle criticism from people who say you should be more practical? My family keeps telling me my business idea is too risky."
I smiled, thinking about all the versions of that conversation I'd had over the years. "I think there are two kinds of risk," I said. "There's the risk of failing at something you believe in, and there's the risk of succeeding at something that doesn't matter to you. Both are scary, but only one leaves you with regrets." Another student asked about competition from larger, better-funded companies. "How do you compete when someone else has more money?" "You don't compete on their terms," I answered. Fresh Connect raised $52 million last year and expanded to 15 markets. But their customer retention rate is 34% compared to our 87%. They're spending a fortune to acquire customers who don't stick around because the relationship is purely transactional. We spend almost nothing on customer acquisition because our customers become advocates who recruit their friends. It was true. While Fresh Connect had achieved impressive growth numbers, they were starting to show signs of the sustainability problems that plagued venture-backed companies focused purely on scale. Several of their markets had already become unprofitable as customer acquisition costs rose and retention rates remained low. Meanwhile, Greenspace continued to grow organically, with profit margins that improved each quarter as our community effects became stronger. We'd proven that patient, relationship-focused growth could be more valuable than explosive, capital-intensive expansion. After the event, Jake and I drove to Jennifer Walsh's farm for dinner. Jennifer had eventually left Fresh Connect and returned to Greenspace 6 months earlier, after discovering that guaranteed payments came with guaranteed restrictions on how she could market her produce and interact with customers. "I missed the relationships," she told us, as we sat on her front porch, watching the sunset over her fields. "The money was nice, but it felt like being an employee rather than an entrepreneur. With Greenspace, I'm not just selling vegetables, I'm sharing knowledge, building community, teaching kids where food comes from." As we drove home that evening, Jake reached over and took my hand. "Are you happy?" he asked. It had become a regular question between us. Not because either of us doubted the answer, but because we'd learned the importance of checking in regularly about whether our choices were serving our values. "Yeah," I said, meaning it completely. "I'm happy in ways I didn't know were possible." Even with all the stress and uncertainty and long hours? Especially with all that, because it's stress in service of something that matters. It's uncertainty that leads to growth. It's long hours spent building something bigger than myself. The next morning, I woke up in our new house, a small craftsman bungalow we'd bought in North Charleston, with enough space for a home office and eventually a nursery.
I checked my phone to find a message from David Chen, Marcus's son, who was now 16 and had started his own urban gardening consultancy using techniques he'd learned through Green Space Academy. Hey, Harriet, just wanted to let you know that the high school I'm speaking at next week asked me to invite you to talk to their entrepreneurship club. Would you be interested? These kids have some really cool ideas, and I think they'd love to hear from you. I smiled and immediately texted back, Absolutely. Let's inspire the next generation. That evening, Jake and I sat in our backyard planning the vegetable garden we wanted to plant in the spring. It felt wonderfully circular. The woman who'd built a platform connecting people with local food was finally going to grow her own. You know what's funny? Jake said, sketching out potential layouts for raised beds. A year ago, I thought your business was competition for our relationship. Now I realized it was preparation. For what? For this. For building a life where we get to do work that matters, with people we care about, in service of values we share. He looked up from his sketching. For becoming the kind of people who can handle whatever comes next. As I looked around our yard, imagining the garden we'd plant and the family we hoped to raise, I realized he was right. Green Space hadn't been about building a business. It had been about building a life where success meant creating value for others, where growth meant becoming more connected rather than more isolated, where the horizon always revealed new possibilities for impact and meaning. The girl who'd started coding in a tiny apartment above a coffee shop was gone. In her place was a woman who'd learned that the most important harvest isn't what you reap for yourself, but what you plant for others to enjoy long after you're gone. And we're just getting started.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.